Hi, I'm Tim, he's Mike, and welcome to Around the Crown. Ford versus Ferrari, Prost versus Senna. The greatest rivalries are timeless. Today we've got a family feud within the Rolex empire. It's blue versus green. Mike, start us off.
Well, I am the ultimate blue guy. I love everything blue, and Rolex just gives us a multitude of choices, some of which we have here, a number of them we couldn't even pull up because they are so popular in blue. So Rolex, while green is kind of their corporate color, blue has been, for at least the last couple of decades, probably the most popular color. Obviously, green's come on the scene in the last few years, but I'm born pure blue. And we have some great options here today.
Now, my favorite of what you've got is actually the Smurfs. Why don't we start with that? It's not the definitive blue Rolex, but it's getting darn close.
It is my favorite as well, which is kind of funny because we have some great choices. But the Smurf, for whatever reason, it's such a different blue than everything else they do. It's not quite baby blue, but it's softer than the regular sub blues. It's just a piece that's unique to that metal. And I also love the fact that it's monochromatic. I don't like the mixed bezel and dials. I think it gets a little muted. If you're gonna go blue, this is so blue, it screams blue, it's perfect.
And there's a little bit of history here. This is a very important historical reference for Rolex. Back in 2008, when this debuted, it was the first ceramic bezel sub. It was the first production white gold sub. There had been prototypes, but this was the first series production model, and it also marked the debut of the modern glide lock clasp, which for me is a huge benefit to owning a sub versus a standard Rolex sports watch. Also worth mentioning the debut of the super case on the Submariner, so in a lot of ways this was a watch of famous firsts.
Very much so, and the thing I found interesting was historically Rolex has introduced new dials, new colors in precious metals, and then eventually worked its way down. But it's never worked its way down into a steel sub. So they've really kept it specific to the white gold version. It's got great weight. I love everything about that watch.
Now the cool thing is there is a yellow gold version of this watch, and at the time they were also making the gloss lacquer blue dial in the two-tone case. Over time that would be phased out. For some reason the yellow gold never captured the imagination of collectors quite like the Smurf. While it's always been there, it's never been the icon that the white gold Smurf is. There was a lot of controversy over this watch with the blue lacquer dial on the two-tone. Tell me a little bit about what happened.
Well, that's exactly why I brought it, because when they did one of the most iconic watches, my first Rolex is a steel and gold Submariner with that blue dial, which was super bright. And it really was a signature, late 80s, early 90s Rolex. Steel and gold was popular, that blue just popped. And when they relaunched it in the modern era, the blue was very different and it was flat. And they really got a lot of feedback from the market that it just didn't quite hit the mark.
Given the huge scope of the two-tone sub, from 1983, with the 16803 and the first of the two-tone subs, it was that explosive blue sunburst dial that defined it. The bezel material would change, the particulars of the case, the bracelet, the clasp, all of that would change. The movement would change, but that dial was eternal. And people did not want the Smurf and its yellow gold equivalent to have the same dial as the Bluesy or the two-tone. So in 2013, this was returned to a sunburst blue, and it's been that way ever since. It's great to have options. Both exist. There is no right or wrong choice, but you know where Mike's heart is. So now here's something that was quite innovative when it bowed back in 2003. This was officially the 50th anniversary Submariner, best known as the Kermit. There's a lot to love here. This is an M-series watch, so you can see a lot of the late dial features. 40 millimeters stainless steel, mechanically identical, but there were some big changes topside. For one, this is not a standard 5-digit Submariner dial. The indices are larger. They're bigger platforms for lume. This is actually a dial style that was first pioneered on the Yachtmaster starting in the early 1990s. More lume, bigger indices, better legibility. We also got this lovely Rolex green anodized bezel, and while we've had ceramic bezel green subs since then, you can never recapture the look of anodized aluminum. It's got a vintage feel, it's extremely old school, and even though all of these watches were made in the 21st century, it has a feel of an 80s and 90s sub to it.
It's got a great look to it, and they also fade, those aluminum bezels, which I think just adds charm to them. I've seen them so light that it's crazy. If you're out in the sunlight a lot, they tend to fade. But it's a very distinctive green that really sticks with that piece, and I loved it for that reason.
It's also a fascinating watch from a transitional standpoint because you can see a little bit of the old Rolex and a little bit of the new Rolex. You can see an increased facility and comfort with using bright colors. You could see an increased perhaps awareness of anniversaries and marking them, as we've seen regular anniversary watches to mark 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of important models. We have solid end links in the bracelet, but we still have a stamped clasp and hollow center links. And of course, we had just moved past the era of perforated lugs. If you see a Kermit with perforated lugs, unless it's the original press photo that Rolex took, bogus. That was the photo of a prototype. It doesn't exist. So if you ever see smaller indices on the dial and perforations in the lugs,
you got a problem.
Look elsewhere. Now, the green sub continued, no longer an anniversary piece, but from 2010, we got what I consider to be the definitive green Rolex watch, and that is the Hulk.
The Hulk is absolutely, because again, now we went to the matching dial, matching bezel, ceramic, it pops. Now, when it first came out, mixed results. It's a lot of green.
It is a lot of green.
It is a lot of green, and it was definitely probably the strongest, maybe the loudest Rolex at the time. But now I think everyone's kind of appreciated it over the years, and now we look at it, especially with the new version, and I think a lot of people might think that's the perfect green Rolex.
And even though it's nicknamed after the least popular Marvel superhero, it is my favorite green Rolex. Take a quick look at this bezel. It's a lovely gloss Cerachrome, so gloss green, but then the dial, which when the watch first came out, Rolex was advertising as green gold, and it certainly has gold content. I don't know if it was perhaps out of sensitivity to Middle Eastern markets, or maybe it didn't meet some sort of hallmarkable standard of purity, but they stopped using that term to describe the dial over time. What really sets this apart from the other green subs for me is that it is a lot of green. It's big, it's green, it's mean. It's not terribly lean, so in that sense it is a little bit like the Hulk. But this watch has a great wrist presence, and it's just explosive. The white gold indices, the possibly green gold dial, the color of the bezel, which is a gloss, almost enamel-like color. Everything about this watch is spectacular and distinct because no sooner did that watch make its mark, and did it ever, but Rolex reverted to the original design.
I don't understand it still to this day. I have to say it's one of my least favorite current references because, again, it just lost a little something. Now, the case size is great. The thinness is better. There are a lot of improvements wearing it, but across the room, it just doesn't have the same wrist presence that if you're going to have green, you got to go big. Yeah. And obviously the Hulk is going big in green. This one just kind of falls flat for me. It's still successful. Obviously, it's in great demand, but it definitely lost a little something to me.
We got a bigger end link to the bracelet, thinner lugs. There's a new movement inside with a 3-day power reserve. And in a lot of ways, this is a fusion of the Hulk and the Kermit. You've got the green bezel in ceramic, obviously. It's got that look, but then you've got the gloss black lacquer dial. I heard a lot of people say that if they were going to do a third-generation green sub, use the no date as the platform, and I thought that would have been a really cool way to do it.
That would be a very interesting way to do it, and again, because I don't think we've had any no date variants.
No.
And again, when we talk about subs purists would really want a no date.
So now that's the sub-purist's take. I think we're agreed that it's either the Kermit or the Hulk, but this is green versus blue, so we need to hear Mike's positive, affirming case for this spectacular Day-Date. Mike, tell me all about this.
Well, again, very unusual dial. Now, the Day-Date's one of the most classic Rolexes. Love it in the material. It's got the classic fluted bezel, very bold fluted bezel as well, which has been controversial at times. But the dial is so special. The Arabic numbers I love. People talk about it being the upside down Arabics as well, which was kind of a period for Rolex. I just think it's so distinctive. It's a deep, deep ocean blue and the blue waves. So we don't know if it's the pattern they call the waves, the color of the ocean, but there's just something about that dial. But it just speaks to you when you have it in your hands.
Like you said, you do have the inverted numerals. It's a little bit jarring at first to see numeral 9 down at 6 o'clock, but this is a moment in time for Rolex. You have that lovely seabed dial, and that's really what it is. It's the image of the rolling texture of a seabed driven by slow currents over eons. And of course, the seabed is where you find oysters, which has all sorts of symbolic and literal significance for Rolex. But this is the biggest of the big presidents. These watches are huge. They're 53 millimeters from lug to lug. They wear almost like Panerai Luminor. If you think the 36 is too small, if you even think a Day-Date 40 might be a little bit too small, something like this is exactly what you want. It has sports watch wrist presence, but with dress watch elegance.
Also, it has great rarity. You know, all the other colors and the pieces we're talking about, some of them, yes, are rare, but I bet that's probably the rarest piece on the table.
No, I'm going to shoot a video with this before we're done with it because I know I'll never see it again. I want documentary evidence that I actually
we did
had
exist.
Exactly. Okay, we're going to go to the high banks at Daytona International Speedway.
beach.
Or maybe the beach outside the Speedway. Mike, what is going on here?
So this is the beach collection. You brought the beautiful green variant, of course. I brought the blue variant. These were launched originally right in the early 2000s as a set. Very unusual, 4 colors, yellow mother pearl, pink mother pearl, and the 2 stones. Were, again, kind of unusual to have a set. It was expensive to be as a set. Eventually they did go singles, but very distinctive, and especially the turquoise has become one of the more collectible Daytonas of the modern era. I love stone dials. Again, it's a very distinctive color. It pops. You might say it was the inspiration for the new OP color, because it kind of goes in that family, but having a Daytona with a spectacular color with a matching strap, it's just a great piece, and again, very special blue.
These were super watches. They launched a quartet of white gold, colorful dial Daytonas back in 2000. These were all P and K serials. The watches were initially intended primarily for a female audience, as the lizard straps that came stock with these were almost all cut short, assuming colorful dials, it must be for women, but guys loved them. There's yellow, there's pink, there's turquoise blue, and there's green. They're different materials, chrysoprase, lacquer, mother of pearl. Incredible looking watches that have become very popular with dudes lately. They are unisex size. Now, I think we've all agreed that women can wear a 40 millimeter, no problem.
No problem at all.
But whereas it's awfully tough for a guy to buy, say, Bulgari Serpenti, even if he likes the aesthetics, it's a difficult thing to wear to the office.
I would be impressed, yes. But guys wear these all the time now, and especially the blue and the green. Even the yellow, I sold one recently to one of my great clients. It's just an awesome watch.
You know, enjoy one, collect all 4, you've got options. So when it comes to blue and green in that sense, you do have to choose unless you want to wear one on each wrist. I think this is particularly impressive. This is one of the other, quote, Daytona Beach models. The dial is chrysoprase or chrysophrase, depending on how you want to say it. Both are correct. And it's a cryptocrystalline with silica, and it's nickel content that gives it that green hue. It is stabilized. It's not going to change its color or its pattern over time, but the closer you get, the more easily you can see impurities in the stone itself.
Yes.
No 2 of these are exactly alike.
Exactly. That's what I love about stone dials, is they are natural, and the colors do vary, and the imperfections vary. That's one of my favorite greens, without a doubt, just because, again, it's distinctive. I also love the fact that Rolex not only matched the straps to it, but matched the boxes to them.
Yes.
I mean, they really went to the next level for those beaches. We're doing the multicolor boxes, which, again, are super collectible if you can find a complete set. Super rare. It's just a great, distinctive green.
And only time I can remember Rolex using lizard leather on a watch.
I still don't know why, but I think you're absolutely right. I don't know, outside of the Cellinis, I don't think we've ever seen lizard on oysters.
And here's the thing. Alligator is always premium. Calfskin is generally more entry-level for a luxury watch. I think the hope was to come up with something that was more upscale than calf, but not as formal and frumpy as alligator leather can be.
Okay, fair point. I think that's interesting because it does tone it down a little bit than a high polish croc would definitely be dressier.
Let me to double check this one that you've got right here. Fun fact about this watch, it has a stamp on the case back as well as on the interior of the clasp from Rolex's French business office. So all the Rolexes decades ago that were going to be sold in France would be stamped on the case, the bracelet, and the clasp with a Rolex France hallmark. So if you ever see that, it's something that ended shortly after these watches were actually made. But if you ever see that stamp where you have 3 letters flanking a little crown, it probably is Rolex France, and you'll see it particularly on vintage watches. This is one of the latest I've ever seen. This is an early 2000 watch with that stamp. It might have been the last of the line. Okay, but the king of all blue dial Rolex watches is this guy.
And arguably the most iconic blue only because it's so limited, and it's Glacier. And again, originally done on day-dates, moved over to the Daytona. It is iconic. It is truly only held for platinum, and it is special. It really does pop. Not your typical blue, very light, but again, in person, it's just an amazing piece. And I think especially on the Daytona, it's really set it apart. You've had a lot of controversy on the blue-brown combination, and people have felt strongly either way. It has such grown on me over the years that I just think it's an amazing watch. That particular version is the baguette diamond one. They do the plain stick as well, but that really is one of the most collectible blue watches in the line today.
This wasn't the first platinum Daytona. There were others, especially in the Zenith generation, that were generally made for VIPs and friends of the Rolex CEO at the time. So those exist. But launched in 2013, this was the first serially produced public access platinum Daytona, a 50th anniversary present to Rolex collectors. I mentioned Rolex has got much more hip to their anniversaries recently with model launches, so we can only imagine what's coming next year with the Submariner anniversary and the Daytona anniversary in one year. But after launching the platinum Daytona with the chocolate ceramic bezel in 2013, they stepped up with a baguette diamond dial on the Glacier Blue, and that's what we have right here. Fans of Rolex have noticed through the years that the Glacier Blue has become darker and more intense. It started out very subtly silver.
It's a great point. And I've had the situation on some of the early day dates where people are like, well, that's not Glacier. But it is. It was at least 2 to 3 shades lighter in the early days. And I'm sure faded a little too, because I've seen them as they age, definitely tones down, but this is much stronger Glacier, and I think it's a much better job.
And I know, I hate to use the ice analogy with the diamond set Rolex, but it really is like Arctic sea ice, and the older it gets, the darker its blue hue becomes, and that's really what you have with the latest Daytonas. And by the way, guys, the feeling of this in the hand, with the solid case back, the solid end links, center links, the thick gauge clasp, this is by far the most massive watch on the table, and it's not even a big piece. Physically, it's not a big piece. All right, so we got some interesting late models.
Now we're going some controversial greens now.
Yeah,
Let's go.
In the last 2 years, we've seen the launch of a palm dial, which is green, 2 different greens, both metallic. I'm not sure exactly what Rolex is referencing here. Maybe this is something you wear to luxuriate in the tropics as you enjoy your Jubilee bracelet and your white gold and steel Rolex timepiece. But it is a wonderfully quirky watch. It's not the only palm dial, but I do think the green palm dial is the rock star of them.
It became very iconic. I think it's, we've heard a lot of the nicknames where they did kind of inspiration, but the palm dial really did cause a stir. I don't love the green. I don't love the pattern, but it certainly stands out as very distinctive. Certainly not my favorite green on the table, but they really did bring something out that's super different. Now, the other one you're carrying, the OP, I think that's a spectacular green. I love everything about that. It pops to me. It's strong. It's getting back to that Hulk where it's green and you know it's green.
Yes. And it's an impressive watch because of the amount of green. This was the first generation 41mm Oyster Perpetual. It's become more of a tonneau case. As the size has grown, it's really changed its shape. And it's got the wrist presence of a sub, of a GMT, of a bigger watch. And part of that is because of the huge canvas for the different colors used. And this is still a regular production model. Some of the other colorful lacquer dial OPs have been retired. This is probably the most distinctive and enduring of the current generation. The Tiffany might be the most expensive, but for me, Rolex, the expression has always been if you're a Rolex watchmaker, a dealer, a collector devotee, you bleed need green, and for me, this is the OP41.
And I think, the Tiffany really went crazy when they discontinued it. I think eventually they will discontinue this green, and I would think this one will be long-term value, a great buy.
So that's a fun piece. I will say, Mike is the blue guy, I'm the green guy. I do like the green palm dial. And I'll mention you have options if you like it. There are gems, there are bigger cases, there are smaller cases, there are full steel, there are hybrid white gold steel options. Here we've got the Jubilee, there are also Oysters. You have a lot of options to customize this watch. As it is here with the white gold bezel, the steel case, the Jubilee bracelet, and the loomed dial, this is a nice middle ground between a very sporty and a very dressy Datejust. This one will really be the all-around watch, and a big part of that is the fact that it's a loomed dial. So you get an opportunity to customize your crazy metallic green palm dial Rolex if you're so inclined, which Mike is not, but I have
You can keep that one.
I have a watch that could unify these two warring factions. This is the peace treaty. It is the Milgauss Z-Blue. Mike, what's going on here?
This is the perfect blending of green and blue for sure. And Milgauss, again, very early, kind of iconic tool watch, got more popular over the days and years and months. And my wife used to wear the white one. I loved it. It's a great size, a very simple sport watch. And then they introduced the green crystals. And I don't know what the technical term is, but it's a green hue that plays the dial through. It's very distinctive. And then they introduced the blue. And the blue-green combination is just amazing. It's a great watch. Again, long-term, this is going to be something we look back 10 years on and go, God, I wish I put one of those away. Because I don't think it'll last forever, but it's a spectacular piece.
And it's the only current production Rolex I actually want to own personally. I love this piece. It's very silly. In 1956, the Milgauss came out. It was for engineers, it was for technicians. Not a humorous bunch. This watch is from a family launched in 2007. And right out of the gate, we got a lightning bolt seconds hand, which is historically correct.
Yes.
Historically, it was not electric orange, however. We also got a green tinted crystal in 2007, and that was the Milgauss 6-digit that everyone wanted until 2014 when this watch debuted, which frankly is a controversial piece because now it's almost postmodernist. We have a green tinted crystal. We have a dial that is electric blue. We have orange print on the dial. We have an orange seconds hand. So we wind up with two different colors of lume, electric blue dial, an orange lightning bolt seconds hand, an orange printed dial, a green tinted crystal, and all of this in what is fairly basic as a watch, 3 hands, no date.
Yes, and it's just such a conglomeration of everything that shouldn't go together and does beautifully. And that's why I think we're going to look back and go, whoa, they really did that. Because I really believe that. The Milgauss, it's time for a refresh. I keep predicting this every year, so I'll probably be wrong again next year. But I think this will go away, and I just think it's such a significant moment in time for Rolex.
I'm not betting against the Z-Blue, though. I've predicted its demise for 4 consecutive years. This is the most putatively discontinued watch. Every single model year ends, this is going to be gone. And even as Rolex has a lot of 3-hand, no-date, Oyster-style watches in the collection, this is always the one that dodges the bullet. We've seen redesigns of the Air King, we've seen redesigns for the Oyster Perpetual, we've seen new variants of the Explorer. The Milgauss Z-Blue somehow is still the last man standing among that group without a wholesale redesign. But I'll also say this, it's not a watch that ever sold in volume. No. So if you want one, get one. They won't be available forever. And while there are certainly scarce watches on this table, I'm not sure there's one that's more likely to put a smile on your face.
I would agree with that completely.
That's green versus blue, and that's our lap around the crown.